Good evening and welcome to the BGC Book Club. I'm so excited to be here with you again this week for another outstanding Black woman writer that we always celebrate and acknowledge here in this space. If this is your first time here, as you can see, my name is Marcy Thomas, the founder of Brown Girl Collective, which is about 13 years old, and also the BGC Book Club, which is about 2.5 years old. And I started it during the pandemic because as much as I like to read and love book clubs and things of that nature, I thought, wow, we can't get together. But what a wonderful way to do this in this forum that many of us have grown accustomed to. So as you're joining the space, if you don't mind, you can drop a line and let us know if it's your first time, where you're joining us from, say hello, whatever the case may be, and we will go ahead and get started. So tonight we're going to be talking to the wonderful Courtney Duke Foster about her glorious book. I know there's a lot of light on it, Passing Notes, and it's probably backwards for you, but that's the name of the book. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, Courtney is a lawyer, mom by day, turned fiction writer by night, day, all the time, whenever she can get it in. Her storytelling career started early when she would tell her very loving and patient grandmother every word and detail of movies and television shows that she had seen. She was bitten by the writer bug a few years ago and has written dozens of poems and short stories, a couple of which have been published in the Bay to Ocean Journal. She is a graduate of Spelman College and Duke University School of Law. And Courtney grew up in Maryland, where she currently resides with her two fabulous daughters and an extremely snuggly cat. In her spare time, she enjoys writing stories, of course, but also watching movies and attending musicals and comedy shows. She loves the art of storytelling in all forms, and that is something that she and I have in common. So, without any further delay, welcome, Courtney.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, yes, I'm so excited to have you here. And I do have to give a quick shout out to someone that we both have in common, Wanda Lloyd, who reached out to me to reach out to you. And for those who may not know who she is a very well known journalist who's had a storied career and also a fellow Spelman sister of Courtney. So thank you, Wanda, if you're watching.
Thank you, Wanda.
Yes. So tell us a little bit, just since I mentioned her, tell us how you met her, because I thought that was an interesting story as well.
Well, years ago, I got a scholarship, Carl Rowan scholarship, and they were colleagues and good friends. She presented that scholarship to me at the big award ceremony, and she offered me an internship that summer at USA Today, where she was an editor. So that's how we first met, and that was obviously an honor. It's an honor to know her and that she thought enough of me to recommend me for this program. So I really appreciate that.
Yes, and she actually wrote a blurb for your book as
She
well. So
did.
she's definitely a fan. So for those who may not be familiar with Passing Notes, tell us a little bit of what the story is about.
Well, it's about two best friends, fresh out of college in 1951. So it's historical fiction. They kissed their families goodbye in DC and board a train, headed to New York City, seeking job opportunities free from the shackles of Jim Crow. Unfortunately, they find out very quickly that New York has its own brand of racism that's just as oppressive as what they were used to back home. But one of the friends, being fair skinned, allows her to take advantage of job opportunities that are unavailable to her darker skinned friend. And we see her manage the challenges and consequences of living a lie.
Mhm.
So essentially, it's about passing for white in the early 1950s, but it's also about colorism and sexism, friendship, romance,
Mhm.
work and family dynamics, like all the things that our parents and grandparents that were relevant to them being Black in America back then, that are still very relevant to us being Black in America today.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah,
something in reading the story that I picked up on, and we talked about it a little bit, prior to coming on live, that there are so many different things that we still deal with, in
yeah,
a workplace specifically, because a lot of the story, centers around people meeting and how they interact with one another at work, and how oftentimes we're still dealing with some of those microaggressions, macroaggressions and things like that. One of the things that I found interesting in the story, of course, is two good girlfriends who take off for the big city,
yeah.
leaving from DC, which, a lot of people consider DC the South, even though it really isn't in my mind. But, I guess even with all of the things that were happening in DC in the 50s,
Right,
it's still going to New York would have been a big deal, like it is in some ways now to go to New York.
right. I mean, yeah, the two friends actually met in college, which they went to historically black college,
Right.
obviously in the 50s, in North Carolina. So they would have experienced it there as well as in DC. I mean, both of my parents were born and raised in DC, and they have stories about not being able to shop at certain stores, um, and my mom tells a story about actually being on a train and when she was a little girl and the air conditioning going out on the colored train, and her
Mm,
aunt brought her and her cousin up to the white section, the white train, and dared the conductor to move them. She's like, I'm not making these children sit in that heat like that. And she got away with it, but we all know that wasn't necessarily the case for everyone. So they definitely experienced segregation and Jim Crow in DC, even though that might have been like the edge, the end of the line before, you cross
mhm.
over into
Right.
a different kind of segregation in the North.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we have someone shouting you out. Actually, we mentioned her in the background.
Oh,
Hey,
hi.
Tina. We were talking about you and Wanda before we came on live, so I'm glad to see that you're here.
Nice to see
Welcome.
you.
Welcome. But yeah, it's just thinking about that and the misconception that going to the north is going to be different.
Right.
You
Yeah, that in just doing different research, and I researched as I wrote. I was incorporating stories that I already knew from my parents and grandparents, and then trying to um, kind of verify the historical context of
right,
them, and just discovering articles and watching a whole documentary about Mr. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. That's pretty enlightening about
right,
all of the protests and work that they were doing in New York prior to the Southern civil rights movement, the civil rights movement that
right.
we usually learn about. So that was very enlightening to find out just about that unwritten segregation that was very prevalent and present in the North that our people had to face.
Right. And I know I've heard a lot of stories as well. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, even though I
Okay.
currently live outside of Atlanta. So I know, in Ohio, a lot of things have gone on. You think it's up north, but not, but there's still
Yeah.
things that have happened. There are definitely a lot of things that took place in Chicago,
Right.
even as blacks were moving into the areas and not being able to, maneuver in the ways that they thought they would have been able to. And then also Detroit. I spent some time living in Detroit, same thing.
Right.
So, there are always going to be those sorts of things that we have to deal with. But it just makes you think about the strength and the tenacity of those people, us as well. But for whatever we think we're going through, it was even worse then. So,
Absolutely.
mm,
And that's just kind of sad that we have to keep fighting for the same things that our grandparents and great grandparents have been fighting for all this time. And my dad tells me a story. He was on a date when the riots broke out, when Martin Luther King Jr. Was assassinated in D.C., and how he was very concerned about getting his father's car home safely. But
Mhm.
you know, we just had another round of riots
Right,
for the same thing. Someone
right.
being murdered by, um, it it's but that we have to continue to fight for the same things is exhausting, but we just keep coming back. We keep getting back up. We're
Mhm.
not going to be deterred.
Right, right. Got a couple of comments here. One is from Cheryl, who wants says she wants to
Oh,
come on and support you. It's her first time, and thank you. This won't be your last time. So, and yes, there is a lot of historical racial content and the problems of not being true to yourself, which we're going to get into some of that here coming very shortly. And Wanda, oh, hey Wanda, wave at you too. We may be in Jim Crow 2.8 these days. We got that right.
right.
Got that right. So, one of the things before we get into a little deeper into the book, what was it in particular that made you want to write this story? Because I mean, there are a lot of different things you can pick up historically, contextually. But what was it that drew you to writing this particular story?
Well, I've been interested in the concept of passing for a long time since I was a little girl. I saw Imitation of Life, the 50s version of that movie, when I was probably about 9 years old. And my mom is watching it. I'm like, what is this? And she's explaining it to me. And I'm just, I'm
Mm.
glued to that story. I didn't particularly like Sarah Jane too much. I didn't like how she
I don't
treated
think
her.
anybody did.
Her mama, but it was certainly a compelling story, and about it at that age. But after that, I thought about it off and on. If I saw a documentary, I saw a documentary called, I think it was called Little White Lie, about Lacey Schwartz and her family secret. Her father was really black, but they tried
Mm,
to convince everyone, including her, that she was just a darker Italian
mm,
person.
mm,
And memoirs and other books like Passing and The Vanishing Half. So anything that has that theme has always been interesting to me. But as I started to write more with the poems and the short stories that weren't actually very short, they were very
mm,
long short stories.
mm,
I just had this idea for the ending of Passing Notes. And I had to like weave my way back to the beginning of how that might have started.
mm,
What was the inception of this big reveal at the end? So, I like to think, because I was such a new writer at that time, like 5 or 7 years ago,
right.
that I accidentally kind of stuck my head up and got hit with an inspiration arrow that was meant for somebody else. But I'm like, well, I got it now, so I'm gonna run with it and write this story. That's kind of where this story came from,
Mhm,
and turned into a book. I didn't know at the time whether or not it was going to be a story or book, because I'd never obviously written a book before. I said, let me see if I can do it. So
and you
here
did
we
a
are.
wonderful job. Wonderful job. As
Yeah.
Wanda mentioned in her blurb, she just was compelled by the story and kept reading and kept reading. I know I read it in a day because I'm like, what's going on? What's going to happen? Here. So as you stated earlier on, it's these two friends. They leave DC, going to New York, seeking opportunities because they wanted to do something besides teaching, which a lot of at that time in history, a lot of women they would have either wound up in nursing or
Hmm.
teaching
Right.
back then, and so they were looking to branch out and do something a little different. But in getting to the new place, they still kind of found out very quickly that they were going to be relegated to certain types of positions because of being Black.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And I love teachers and nurses, but there there was a time when obviously um, jobs were limited for women, especially Black women. I mean, my mom and my grandmother were teachers, so
And
and
my
that's
mom and my grandma too. So,
yeah, that's what they wanted to do. I just wanted to explore, what would someone have to do if that's not what their passion was? That's not where their heart was. They wanted to write or like these two, they were actually good writers and editors, and they wanted to do something with that wasn't involving teaching people how to do it, but to actually do work in the industry themselves. So they branched out and went on an adventure to see if they could get the jobs, and they did. And they kind of end up feeling a little duped because it turns out they weren't going to be able to advance
right.
um, as Black women in that company, and very likely not in very many industries in New York, even though there wasn't technically Jim Crow laws there.
Mm-hmm. And quickly, I don't know if we said her name or not, Cheryl, she's the lead character.
Right.
But quickly, Cheryl, because she is a fair skinned woman who's able to pass, finds herself in a situation
Mhm.
where, she's kind of thrust into a situation that she didn't actually choose for herself, which I found very interesting.
Right. And, I think that if you think about passing in any books that are written about passing, you always get a unique kind of origin story of how it started. And some people pass for convenience, like in passing the book and movies that just came out based on the book that was written in the 1920s. One of the characters would pass so that she could have a nice meal or cold drink in a department store um, restaurant, or you could sit somewhere in the front of a streetcar or something like that. And then there were people who passed at work and then went home to their families. And then there were people who entered into just living as white people that never saw their families again, that didn't interact with them. I have a story like that in my own family where which is kind of something I drew on for the book, where a great something uncle
Right.
went up north and wrote a letter saying, "Yeah, I have a different life now, and I don't want to see or can't see any of you again. So don't come
Mm,
visit me here."
right.
So yeah, and no one ever heard from that person again. So you just in this book, it's a little bit different because she wasn't seeking to live as a white woman, but this opportunity presented itself, and she was in the right place at the right time. After just hearing that as a Black woman, she wouldn't be able to advance
Mm-hmm.
in that company, and she went for it, um, kind of head first without thinking about it. And then
Right.
she has to figure out how she's going to pull it off, um,
Right.
at having no experience and not really knowing, um, having no prepared no backstory for herself to
Right.
explain where she
Right.
came from. And so that's what good friends are for. So her best
Right.
friend, Betty, helps her figure out what she can tell people and all of that. So that is just a different kind of take on how someone might come to make that kind of decision for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and how difficult it would be once they have chosen that to actually, in reality, what that meant for them.
Right, to walk it out from day to day, understanding that there are things that you might want to do that would be a normal part of your life. Like, for example, I'm going to go out and party with my best friend, who's a brown skinned girl. Well, I can't really do that because then, that'll cause, people to start asking questions and things like that. One of the things I liked about Betty, who is her best friend, is that she was definitely a good friend, through and through throughout the story. She was someone who always reached out to Cheryl, helped her in any way that she could, encouraged her, and really wanted the best for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure that Cheryl would not have been able to do what she did without Betty's help because, Betty being in the position that she was in, she was connected to a lot of the Black employees that worked for the company. And you know how, you hear the stories of Black employees, especially maintenance people and cleaning staff, become kind of invisible. So they keep
Furniture.
they hear they hear things that maybe other people wouldn't hear. So they get to keep an eye, by keeping a pulse on what's happening. They get to listen out for any any inkling that anyone knows what Cheryl's secret is, and
Mhm.
Betty helps her that way too, by assuring her that no one has any idea that you're passing, so you can calm down, you can relax, and keep
Right, right.
keep doing your job.
And
Yeah,
that's somewhere passing notes comes from
passing
because they're
notes.
working in the same company in different departments. And one of the ways that they communicate is passing notes to one another. So
Yeah.
that's one take on, the actual name of the book. As you were just mentioning, the whole fact of, the Black people who worked for this company are kind of in the background. People don't really think that they're that intelligent or
Mhm.
whatever thoughts
Right.
that they have of them. So they say and do things, in their presence, thinking that, it doesn't really matter. But the flip side is happening for Cheryl and one of the employees that she meets and ultimately has a relationship with John Jones. The same
Mhm.
thing, because people look at them and they see a white person. There are conversations that are held as well.
Right, between Cheryl and John.
Cheryl and John, and then there are white co-workers who think that they are white as well.
Right. They do, and Cheryl can overhears some things about, you're talking about when she overhears how she got her positions and advanced in her
Mm-hmm,
position.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah. So there's that work dynamic that
mm-hmm.
just, these coworkers believe that Cheryl is white. So this is where the sexism comes in, and that
Right.
we perpetuate against each other. So they contemplate or speculate that she's involved in some not so
Right.
professional activities in
Mm-hmm,
order to advance the way that she has been able to at the company, and that sort of puts a damper on a little romance that she had been having with John,
mm-hmm.
because of course you have to, um, she's really there to live out her dreams and have that position, so she can't be that woman at the
Mm-hmm.
company that people think is only there because of whatever favor she might have been doing, that didn't have to do with editing
Right.
stories and books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's that. So there's definitely that. We have the cattiness that sometimes you might find when there might be a little bit of jealousy there, between coworkers. And some of that, I mean, I think is rightful because they do touch on the fact that they are capable of doing a lot of the work that she has done and have done, but yet she's getting recognition, and they just can't seem to understand why
Mm-hmm.
that would be if there's not this other element that you know that she's doing that
Right.
that elevated her to a higher level than they've been able to achieve. Um, so that's important to the story
Right.
as well.
Yes, it is. Just thinking about that, reminded me of an experience that I had once. I was in the Air Force a long time ago now, and I can remember while I was in the Air Force, there were certain things that I was doing, awards that I was winning, and stuff like that. And I remember once it was one of the black guys who worked with me who made a comment that, well, you're only getting all this because you're sleeping with so and so. And I'm like, really? Where you
Wow.
get? Yeah. He got cussed out real good. but it's
You
like
didn't beat around
people,
the bush at
people
all.
think that, sometimes
Yeah,
it's your own people,
yeah, a lot of
who will make assumptions to think that you don't have the qualifications to do the job or whatever the case may be in that. And then also, this is the 50s. So there's a certain level of sexism that was just going on in general, way before Me Too. So,
times.
whether it's guys pinching women on the behind or, just making, certain comments about, you should be at home barefoot and pregnant or, whatever. It was kind of wide open back then anyway.
Yeah, and a lot of things that happen that we have the advantage of, maybe maternity leave and
Mhm.
things like that didn't wasn't really a thing back then. So if you became pregnant somehow, then whatever job you were able to get was in jeopardy.
Mhm.
And some of that is in the book as well. And
Mhm.
it's just kind of like, well, of course you can't work here anymore. You're pregnant. How dare you? So
Right, right, right,
yeah,
right.
um, yeah. So there's some of that some of the characters face
Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
story as well.
Hmm. Well, I want to talk a little bit about John because he also plays a significant role in the story. He is the person that winds up being Cheryl's boyfriend later on in the story. But
Mhm.
initially when they first meet, I found it kind of funny. As it played out later. I'm not going to say how it plays out, but
Okay.
he's this nice young good looking guy on the rise that comes in, and all of the women are kind of looking at him and and things like that. But he also has a very interesting backstory um,
Mhm.
as well, being a veteran, and some of the things that happened with him that even put him in that place. So tell us a little bit about John Jones, or J4.
Right. So he's that guy. He's a good-looking guy. He's there to do his job. He likes to read. He is a good editor. He's sought after, as you said, by a lot of the single women who work there. And he doesn't seem to be interested in anyone until Cheryl comes on the scene. So that is a little bit of fodder for jealousy as well, I
Right.
think, among her coworkers. But, he's just genuinely a good guy. He's a good character. He does have some anger issues a little bit. Like he can go from 0 to 60 very quickly. He's passionate, let's just say.
Right.
Um, he's very, very gentle with Cheryl, and he is also, he's an activist in his own right. So he is doing his best to kind of bring some color to the publishing company that they work at. He wants to introduce Negro authors, as he would call it, to their roster, and he's kind of pushing for that in the company, and not initially very successfully, but he does work towards that goal. But even still, it's not something that triggers Cheryl to want to share her secret with him,
Right.
because she doesn't, she starts to care for him, and she doesn't want him to have to also keep her secret,
Hmm.
like Betty's keeping her secret. She
Mhm.
doesn't want too many people involved in this deception that she considers what she's doing. So she continues to keep that secret from him even as their relationship progresses. So you are kind of left wondering, I mean, is she ever going to tell him?
Right, right. 'Cause I
Is,
mean, one of
how
the
can we sustain this situation
right,
without her?
right.
And that's where the consequences come in. So without
Mhm.
kind of sharing exactly who you are with the person that you are involved with, she has to make some very tough decisions
Mhm.
along the way. That him over her family,
Right,
so to speak, and it's kind of a heart wrenching situation that crops up, but she can't do both. It just
right,
becomes too complicated if she can't maintain relationship with her family and also pursue a relationship with John and continue to keep her secret. So she has to make some tough choices. Nothing
right.
that I would want to have to do.
Right. I'm just thinking, tough on so many levels because, as you mentioned, because she is passing and, she's away from her family. So, of course, her family isn't aware of that this is going on.
Hmm.
Um, so, there's that. There is having this um, job that you wouldn't be able to even be in that position if people knew who you really were.
Right.
And so there's that, that, and then the whole thing of being in a relationship. Because just thinking about the fact that, relationships are supposed to be based on trust and, being able to be open and honest and transparent. But you find yourself in a situation where you love someone, but at the same time, you're lying to the person that you love.
Yeah. And that's always where things go wrong
Mhm.
because it's a tough situation to sustain. But I think that, as we, find out in the end, she wasn't alone in having, secrets that she
Mhm.
wasn't sharing, even though John does seem to be very open and honest with her about what he's, been through and what his family situation is. You find out maybe he's not being completely honest
Mhm.
about everything. Um, and then I guess have to figure out how to overcome that, um, and what happens after that. But yeah, it's in and just the turmoil that they would have had to go through,
Mhm.
keeping that part of themselves, Cheryl keeping that from him, um, in order, what she thinks is, going to save her relationship
Right.
with him if she keeps that secret. But, it doesn't necessarily work out that way.
Right, right. Because just thinking about that, not even with the character, because I mean, there are a lot of ways that could have been written, but just the fact that you fall for someone and you know that if you're honest about who you are, they may reject you.
Yeah. And then, there's several times in the book where she could have the opportunity to to tell the truth. But she's kind of getting bad advice from
Mm,
people in her, black family and her friends who don't necessarily know really how to handle that situation either.
right,
That, we shouldn't tell them, this isn't something that you're going to want to tell them, and things like that. And then trying to figure out, well, maybe, they're probably right. Let's just hold this and keep this to myself. But, that's, I think that's something that a lot of people in relationships have dealt with throughout the course of relationships
mhm,
in
mhm.
history. Maybe not something as big as this, but I mean, something a little, something that happened to you that you might not want to share, but it's still a big part of who you are. You don't necessarily want to express that to your partner until you know you can trust them.
Right.
And then sometimes maybe it's a little bit too late because, you know, they haven't known it all this time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just something, and just the fact, like you're talking about getting advice from this person, that person. Of course, whenever someone gives you advice, it's based upon how their lens and how they see a thing, and because people that she's talking to aren't people who are in her same position, it's easy
Mhm.
for them to say, "Oh, well, just don't say anything," because
Right.
they've never been in that position.
Right. That's
and
absolutely true.
and Cheryl has really, throughout her lifetime as a fair-skinned redhead, has had to deal with a lot of things and being seen as different, or stuff like that, or dealing with colorism, because we know oftentimes when you hear about colorism, you think of towards darker skinned people, but it goes both ways.
Yeah, definitely. And, this is a glimpse at, what type of bullying and ostracization and otherization that she experienced from, friends and being in school, and even to a certain degree, her family, um, in being that complexion, which was not completely different from theirs because they are, described as kind of caramely or khaki colored. So they're not,
Mhm.
they're on the lighter end of the spectrum themselves, but she's kind of drastically very fair skinned,
Mhm.
and experienced a lot of kind of rejection from from her people. And then also when people found out that, or white people found out that she wasn't white, you know, it was a problem. So
Mhm.
she, in the beginning, expresses not really feeling comfortable in her own skin, um, and kind of being defined by those experiences and letting people define who she is. And she kind of, even in terms of going to New York for this job. This was all Bettie's idea. So
Right.
she's just kind of going with the flow, and where life kind of takes her, and you see her grow a little at the
Mhm.
end, towards the end, and she is deciding to go for promotions at work,
Mhm.
because you gaining confidence in the job that she knows that she can do. She's got a lot of confidence in her relationship, even though she's carrying a
Mhm.
secret, and kind of how that she deals with John um, towards the end. And then she is calling a lot of the shots,
Right.
kind of.
Oh, yeah, she definitely is doing that, making
Yeah,
a lot of decisions for how she wants things to go, and speaking up and speaking out in the ways that she is able to. So she's definitely a strong woman. Yeah,
yeah.
even though we don't.
She becomes that way,
Right.
and you see
Right.
that. It's not a long period of time. We're kinda, like, talking about less than 2 years that
Mhm.
the book
Mhm.
covers.
Mhm.
So you see, her go from a very quiet, introverted, kinda timid, um, young young, new to the employment industry or
Mhm.
publishing industry, and then she grows into this confident woman. And then you also, it kind of leaves you with a question of, where do they go from there?
Right. Right.
Because
Well, I was just thinking that in my
yeah.
head, because I'm like, okay, you and I, and the people who've already read it,
Mhm.
we know what happens, but it's like, yeah, what's the next step? Because I mean, taking it away from the character for a moment, if someone is doing something similar to that, how long is that really sustainable? Because to live that lie in a and be in a workplace and continue to rise up and not really show who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stories out there, true stories of people who you don't find out that they were actually Black until they're dead or really, really old. And
Mm-hmm.
so they've been able to live that life their entire lives. Their families didn't know. Um, I really enjoy the show, like finding your roots and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who do you think you are,
Mm-hmm.
especially the ones when they reveal, DNA, and people have DNA, of sub-Saharan African DNA that they didn't know that their ancestors were African American or were enslaved, and they
Mm-hmm.
can actually trace back to find that great 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 grandmother or grandfather that was enslaved and where they were and what plantation they were on. That's fascinating to me. I love those stories. And there's as we have all these resources these days with DNA testing and ancestry.com. I can imagine that there's just so many people that are going to be able to discover these things about their past and their ancestry that they didn't know because it was a family secret.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that at this point for passing notes, it could be that way, and it is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, it leaves you with the question of, is Cheryl going to eventually, tell people um, who she is and what her actual background is, or is she going to continue with to hold on to the secret? And I think that she recognizes there's a power in that, in where she is and where she works and what she and John can do to kind of promote um, Black Negro authors, as they call
Mm-hmm.
them, um, working from the inside.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Um, and perhaps it would be better for her to keep her secret, and she might be able to get some more things done
Mm-hmm.
for Black people at that time if she continues to live as a white person to
Mm-hmm.
promote these ideas and to introduce them to our company. And that's kind of aspirational for me because I know, like, even now, um, publishing industry isn't necessarily a paragon of diversity. It's not.
Right.
They're still struggling with that and how to um, welcome and promote
Mm.
authors of color. So it's nice to be able to write a little bit about that being a success story in the 1950s, which
Right.
may not have necessarily been the case in reality. But I like to think that there were people who were pushing for more diversity in publishing, even back then. You know,
Right.
even if they weren't able to achieve that, I like to think that there were people in the boardrooms and in meetings saying, "Hey, did you see these books about written by people of color? We should
Mm.
really consider that because they're good."
Right.
And
Right.
yeah.
And that brings up something else that we were talking about. Kind of segues. We're getting into the last few minutes that we have together.
Aw.
And you are self-published. You decided to go that route. Tell us a little bit about what made you go that route versus maybe going the traditional publishing route.
Well, I kind of dabbled. I dipped my toe into traditional publishing by querying a couple of agents that I met at writers conferences and things like that, and they weren't interested. But it was very early in. I really just finished writing it. There's no editing that had been done, not even by me at that point, and it wasn't ready for publication whatsoever. So they
Mhm.
weren't interested, and I decided to kind of, put it up and work more on my writing and write more stories. And then I wrote another book. So And then I had an opportunity that kind of during the pandemic that fell into my lap last year to work with a publishing consultant who would help me um, publish, and I just felt like that was be easier for me to control. You
Mm,
know where I am with being I'm a full time lawyer and mother and things like that, and I could kind of direct that experience in the way that I wanted it to go, and also learn a lot too.
mm,
Um, and then my emotional state isn't set up for the level of rejection that you go
mm,
through with
mm,
querying, and then them trying to sell your book to publishing companies and things like that. So I was like, well, let me do this, see what I can do, working with the consultant and doing it myself. And it wasn't easy by any stretch of the imagination. I was kind of so learning curve was very steep,
mhm.
um, but it was definitely something that I controlled.
Right.
I picked my cover and my
Mhm.
title and editors that I
Right.
worked with. All of that was
Mhm.
100% my choice, and I appreciate all of the work it took and the lessons that I learned from that. So, I think that was the right choice for me and
Mhm.
where I am um, at this point with the writing.
And I think that, it's good that you did that. And thanks for sharing that story because a lot of times, it can get picked up later on, down the line. But there is power in being able, as a creative, I consider myself a creative as well. There
Hmm.
is power in being able to have an idea and work on that idea and put that idea out there and, see how it gains traction or whatever the case may be versus waiting for some gatekeeper to tell
Yeah,
you, oh
right.
yeah, or they want to change up how you do things. I told you,
Hmm.
I've had about a story like that. People are like, why are you doing it this way, or why aren't you including these people, or things like that. But when it's yours, you can do it however you choose to, and you'll find your audience. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're gonna get the praise or the flack for the choices that are made for you or the choices you make for yourself. So,
Hmm.
you have to make a decision, what works best for your spirit. Like, do
Hmm.
you want to take responsibility for really what you were responsible for, or do you want the responsibility for choices that were made by a team of other people that, may not have hit well um, to the public? So, it's a lot of things to consider. I don't think that one avenue is better than the other,
Right.
but it's definitely something that you can think about. And I'm so fortunate that there's so many resources available to independent authors these days that makes it not as mysterious of a process as I'm sure it was probably even 5 years ago,
Hmm.
10 years ago. So, there's a lot out there for you to learn how to um, do it yourself. And that's what I did.
And we're glad that you did. We have a question from Lisa. Lisa asked, tell us about any other projects you're working on. Is there a second book in the works?
There is. Thank you, Lisa. That's my friend.
Oh,
Um,
hey.
uh, there is. I did. When I finished passing notes, I wrote the second book right away. That is titled "Now Results Will Vary."
Mhm.
It's been that title for 5 years, so I think that it might stick. But that's I'm going to be editing that in the editing process for that and preparing that for publication hopefully next year. So
Okay.
that's going to be like, passing notes is the inception of a family secret. results will vary. It's like the consequences of
Mm,
that um, on on the next generation and the generations after that.
got it. So, well,
Mhm.
we'll be in touch. So, I definitely would love to have you back to talk about that one as
I
well.
would love to
Um,
be back.
but yeah, one of the things that I know that oftentimes when by the time a book is published and people are on the speaking circuit and all those sorts of things that they are already working on or have finished something else. Because you are a mom who has a full time job that pays the bills,
Right.
when do you actually find time to write?
Um, in the wee hours of the morning. Any, after work or on the weekends, um, during dinner, after the kids go to bed. When I'm writing, yeah, that's a lot of late nights because I have to work during the day, and um, a lot of times you just don't, you might have a minute to maybe work on a paragraph or jot down an idea for a chapter, but you don't really have a lot of time to do in-depth things until things are settled down and quiet. So yeah, it's a challenge to find time to work on anything, especially if you might be kind of struggling to figure out how to word something. I've definitely sat in front of a computer screen for a few hours and written like one sentence because I'm just, not focused or exhausted, from just the day. But I do it every day. Like when you're writing, do something, look at it every day. And eventually you'll have a whole something
All
to,
right.
present. Yeah.
So do you well, I know you said in this case you kind of had an ending and then you went back to kind of flesh out the rest of the story.
Mhm.
Did your characters kind of speak to you along the way and to tell you where to go, or did you already know what you wanted them to do, or certain scenes did you already kind of know that?
I had to write as, the story unfolded for me. I didn't do an outline. I didn't even know if I was going to be able to finish it. So I
Mhm.
just would write and an idea like how is this going to make sense? How do I put this into context? And then, a little bit of a backstory would unfold, or how to propel the story forward, or some dialogue, a scene that would, I like to advance my plot with dialogue a
Gotcha.
lot. So, um,
Mhm.
it's like me in the shower talking to myself, and what does this sound? Does this sound like something Cheryl would say, or what
Mhm.
would Betty say? And some things um, would come easily, and some things have to be reworked, and then that's why you have also good editors, and you have your developmental editors, and a lot of the things that got added to it, to enhance kind of the historical context of the story. I have to thank some, even like my ARC readers, advanced readers, were like, well, they didn't have an English version of Anne Frank's
Mhm.
diary in
Mhm.
1951. Oh, okay. Well, then I guess somebody's going to have to be able to speak French.
Mhm. That's
So
good.
there's that kind of enriches the story a little bit. Um, and we would go from there. So with that added characteristic of a character, then we have a more story
Mhm.
that I can create from just them being able to do that thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, and how they might interact with each other, um, knowing that about that character. And I was like, oh, well, that was good to know about Cheryl, that she can
Mhm.
speak French. And I didn't know that for a long time in the story. So it just kind of unfolded. So I enjoyed getting feedback from people, and even my dad, like, I don't know. I think I wrote in there that somebody had on some pantyhose. And he was like,
Mm-hmm.
they didn't have pantyhose back in 1951. I was like, oh,
Oh.
they didn't? Well, how'd you know that, Daddy? But okay.
Okay. Maybe
He was
stockings
like,
and garters, maybe.
he was like 4 years old then, but okay. That's actually true. So I have to, you know, figure out, and that's another element that is an interesting thing to research, like what type of undergarments people
Wow.
wore in the 50s. I mean, did they have boxer shorts? I mean, I get, but I don't know these things, so I
Right.
have to find out. And that helps with description and making things more vivid and adding to the story so that people feel like they can see it, they can see
Mhm.
what it is that you're writing.
Right,
So
and that detail, yeah, because I didn't even think about that, because a lot of the people that I talk to, not everyone, but a lot of people have done historical fiction, and there are a lot of little pieces, because like if
hmm
you watch a movie, and
right.
you being a fan of all types of storytelling, if you watch a film and say it's 1960, and someone has, I don't know, a certain type of cereal that that cereal wasn't out in
Right, right,
1960.
right, right.
Things like, and therefore
Absolutely.
you pay attention to stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. That's
And I
good.
had to find out, my characters go to Central Park. When
Mhm.
was Central Park? Did people go there? What types of things that people do in Central Park? Does it fall in line with the scene that I'm seeing, or do I need to make some adjustments to be more historically accurate?
Mhm.
So that was part of the process and learning process about that time period and about New York in the 1950s. So, and that was actually a fun part.
That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank you. We're going to end with a comment from our friend
Thank
Wanda.
you so
Describing
much,
good
Wanda.
luck with the book, and thank you, Wanda, again for reaching out to me and recommending. I enjoyed reading the book, and I enjoyed talking to you, Courtney, and I consider it an honor and will be looking forward to the next time. So I know that we'll be on the lookout, as it's been scrolling at the bottom where you are on Facebook and Instagram, and then her website, so you can see about the different projects that she's working on and know, when the next book comes out. But if you haven't read this one, read this one first.
Yes,
And then
please.
be on the lookout for other things to come. So thanks again, Courtney. I look forward to having a chance to talk to you again next year.
Thank you, Marcia. This was an honor. It was very wonderful talking to you, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate you having me.
Oh, no problem. I want you to hold on for 1 second. I'm going to do my announcements for next week, but I don't want you to go anywhere yet. So just hold on for a second.
Okay.
All righty. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Courtney and we really enjoyed having a chance to share her wonderful book with you all. If you have any questions, or if you want to shoot me information, or if you are an author or know of someone else who's a great author who would be a good guest for the BGC Book Club, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at editor@brown-girl-collective.com. Just in way of what's coming up next. Next week, we will have Kendra Allen here to talk about her book, Fruit Punch, which is a memoir. So we'll be talking to Kendra Allen. Actually, she's been on before with her book of poetry. So this time she's coming back to share her life story in memoir form. And then in 2 weeks, we will have The Women Could Fly by Megan Giddings. So be on the lookout for that in a couple of weeks. So in the meantime, in between time, everybody, thank you so much for joining us once again. You enjoy the rest of your evening or morning or afternoon if you're watching this later on. And we look forward to seeing you again the next time. Take care. Bye-bye.